welcome to the Life in General podcast. My name is Nick.
I'm Ian.
You're remote, Ian, for the second week in a row. Hey,
Technically the fourth week in a row.
No, I mean like second week in a row that people will be able to see us.
See us, right? Yeah, visually remote. Yes.
So how's isolation going for you, man?
Well, I'm really only isolated when I have days off. Otherwise, I'm at work.
That's true. You work 4 days a week, so
yeah, which is no different than
yeah.
And it's on a 2-week cycle, so if I get during the weeks, I get maybe 1 or 2 days off in a row, but then I have my every other weekend off. So
yeah. Hopefully looking back on our recording from last week, the audio and everything sounded a lot better than it did for the show before.
Mm-hmm.
With the exception of me harassing Ian about I talked about the quality of the internet, and then his internet dropped him or something. I don't know what the hell happened, and
I don't know if it was mine
disappeared. Or
not. No, I mean it could have been, but I don't think it was directly my internet. I mean it could have been throttled because of all the quarantining and stuff, but because
it just could have been like a momentary hiccup in the internet connection. It could have been anything.
Right. Yeah.
And it could happen again. More product placement.
Yeah, it could have happened again. It could happen again. I mean, during this one. No, we're talking about it, so it's bound to happen now.
Yeah. So, what was that? A couple of months back, we did a show where we talked about the music of Pink Floyd. And prior to that, we had done an episode. Originally, the first episode like this was supposed to be a Jethro Tull episode. And then we did the episode, and Ian kind of accused me of hijacking the episode to talk about the album cover for the album Aqualung.
Right, or the controversy thereof.
Correct. And I didn't intend it to hog up for 45 minutes of that episode, but it kind of did. So I felt like I kind of felt bad, and we decided to do the music of Jethro Tull revisited. So that's what we're going to do today.
We're going to go through the history of the band with
correct,
hitting on the albums and
correct.
Else. Yeah.
So I mean, Ian, obviously you were named after the lead singer of the band, and you've been a fan of the band for a majority of your life.
Yes.
I know we talked about this before. I guess we kind of touch on it again, but both of your parents fans of the band, or was it just your dad? Or
primarily just my dad. I mean, my mom, fair weather. She likes some of the songs.
Yeah.
My dad has a tendency to, when he gets into something, he tends to overdo it, and it's actually something that I do too.
I think a lot of people do.
By the time they got divorced, I think she'd had her fill of Jethro Tull for a while, to the point that probably I don't think she actually enjoyed listening to Jethro Tull for another 25 years before she could say, "Oh yeah, that's enjoyable again." But
I'm sure she heard quite a bit of it.
Oh yeah, some of my earliest memories is my dad didn't go to church with us when they were married, but my mom would take my sister and I to church. And on a Sunday, and we'd be coming back home, and especially in the summertime, we pull into the driveway, and I could hear music blaring from the house.
Yeah,
and it was always Jethro Tull. In fact, I remember one specific time coming home and Heavy Horses being on, just blaring from the house.
Mm-hmm.
So back in the very early 80s.
Yeah. So I guess for people that don't know the band.
Mm-hmm.
Or are kind of casual fans of the band, you want to kind of go through the formation of the band and all that? Or
well, in my experience, there's really not a lot of people who are in between. It's either you don't know them or you know them really well. At least, I mean, there's some people who are like, oh, okay, the flute player in the band, that flute player band. But I get a lot of people who either, oh yeah, or I know them, or I don't know who you're talking about.
Yeah,
there's not a lot of in between. They formed in '67 in Blackpool. They started
which is on the northwest coast of
England.
Yeah. About midway between Liverpool and Lancaster, I believe.
Yeah, I'd have to look at a map to be 100% sure, but it's up there. And
because I'm a fan of English soccer, I know the layout of England pretty well.
Blackpool is actually a tourist town. It's kind of the Sandusky of
England.
England, yeah, where they've got the like an amusement park there, and it's a kind of a tourist uh, city of sorts.
Yeah.
But they started there, and it kind of started out as like they started out as like a 6-piece kind of a jazz band, but that ended very, very quickly. And there was like the John Evans band then.
Well, I mean, I think actually before that it was just Ian Anderson on guitar, um, Jeffrey Hammond, and then John Evans on drums. And they played
that didn't last
that.
very
No, but that was kind of where the band kind of started,
right.
or what would eventually become the band kind of started.
Right.
And it was actually Jeffrey Hammond that encouraged John Evans to drop the S from his name, because Jeffrey Hammond thought it made him sound more unusual. It's a very British thing to do, I guess.
Yeah, and John Evans doesn't need a lot of help being unusual.
No, that's very true.
But yeah, but it quickly became like a 5, 6, 7-piece kind of a jazz band. But again, that didn't last very long either.
Yeah, because I know when they signed with Terry Ellis and Chris Wright in November of '67 to manage them, they were a 6-piece band at that time. And then it was shortly after they signed that deal that the band like completely broke up. And it was Ian Anderson, Glenn Cornick, and Mick Abrahams that recruited.
Well, yeah, Mick came in very, very shortly after that breakup, because he wasn't in the John Evans band.
No, you're right. It was actually Neil Smith was the guitar player when they signed the deal. So after they signed with Terry Ellis and Chris Wright, that's when Neil Smith left the band and Mick Abrahams took over on guitar. They broke up, and then those three recruited Clive Bunker, and that kind of formed what that band would be.
Right.
Did I miss anything? That 4-piece band.
Yeah.
And it was actually really interesting because I know that at that time it was they went through. I don't want to take over this. You go ahead and finish. I was going to kind of talk about the different names and why they went through.
Well, I mean, I don't even know all the names, because the problem was the way to get your name out there, to get basically to be a functioning rock band or a blues band, really is what they were shooting for at that point.
Yeah.
You had to get a residency at the Marquee Club in London, and every week they would try out to be to get a residency, and every week they would get shot down. So the next week they'd have to go in with a different name to even get a chance, because otherwise the Marquee Club would say, no, we already heard you guys last week.
Yeah.
So every week they'd had to try a new name, and what stuck obviously was Jethro Tull. Do
you know how they ended up with that name though?
It was actually their booking agent. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't actually. So it wasn't actually the booking agent. It was one of the booking agent's staff members, who was a big history enthusiast. And so, because some of the other names I know that they came up with were Navy Blue was one of the names. Ian Henderson's Bag of Nails was
Bag of Blues. Bag of Blues too.
Okay.
Bag of Blues.
And then my favorite, Candy Colored Rain. Which is a terrible name. I mean, I was in a band in high school, and we had our share of terrible names.
Anything but cheese.
Yeah, 14 Pounds of Dangling Fury was another one for a short time, and there's a.
But yeah, the week they got signed for the residency was the week they were Jethro Tull, and that's just it just stuck.
Now, from what I heard, it was actually I don't know if they were actually signed, but I know it was the first night that they were asked to come back and perform again.
That night they were given a Thursday, I think it was a Tuesday and Thursday night residency.
Yeah. Okay.
2 nights a week residency.
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, every band Zeppelin, the Who, I mean, all these bands went through the Marquee Club.
The same thing. Yeah.
I mean, they all the bands that came out to be like these giant classic rock bands, all came through the Marquee Club. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the beginning, and that was in February of late January, early February of 1968.
Yeah.
When they did that. So, and they recorded an album like right away. I think they recorded it in like a week and a half.
I know it was a really short period of time.
Very quick.
Which for the time I think was pretty common. I know the Doors did the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They recorded their first album in 7 days.
Yeah, I think Black Sabbath's first album was 8 days.
Yeah.
So yeah, very common for those artists to just pump out their first album very quickly.
Well, because you figure
fire.
A lot of those bands had been touring or playing locally for a good amount of time at least, and probably had quite a few songs already ready.
Mm-hmm.
And then just kind of go into the studio and knock them out.
Yeah, pretty much. And there were a couple covers on the album.
There's not like a writing process. It's not like a big writing process.
Right. The name of their first album is called This Was. And I don't know if they really had the foresight at the time, but it really is kind of a perfect title, because this was Jethro Tull. It really was just that moment in time.
Yeah.
The album was released. It got quite a bit of critical acclaim, not so much in the States, but in the UK, it was quite popular.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing with it is that Mick Abrahams, he was kind of I wouldn't say he was like a secondary leader of the band, but he had a vision for the band that really didn't entail them going very far. He hated flying. He refused to fly, actually. So there was no way they were ever going to be able to make it in the U.S. And he had a very narrow, I say it's a narrow view, but a very narrow view of what he wanted as a band structure. He wanted a blues band.
Oh, and that's it's a very blues heavy album for sure.
It very much is. But if you listen to some of the songs, like, it's the one album where Ian Anderson isn't the sole songwriter. Mike Abrahams did write several songs, and Ian Anderson co-wrote 2 songs. He co-wrote a song with Mick Abrahams and co-wrote a song with Clive Bunker.
Mm-hmm.
But the Ian Anderson songs, you can hear it's a little less bluesy.
Yeah.
And there's an element of jazz because he throws in his cover of Roland Kirk's Serenade to a Cuckoo.
Yep. Which is a great song.
Right. And his version of it isn't too divergent from Roland Kirk's, but just divergent enough.
Yeah.
In fact, though, I would say that Roland Kirk, I don't know if he did it on purpose or what, but he altered the arrangement of it in a live performance, like in 75, and it's really interesting. It's an interesting show because you see it, all kinds of crazy shit going on with him. He really upped the ante on it.
Yeah.
But so that it really was kind of like that. This was at this very moment of the band history,
and it didn't chart too bad in the U.S. It reached 62 in the U.S., which isn't too bad.
Yeah, no, I mean it's not, but I don't know how the charts really worked back then. They probably were more important then. So like a number 62 is a relative hit. Then 62 now no one even fucking talks about. But
yeah, but they were number 10. It reached 10 in the UK.
Okay. Yeah, right. And it was quite popular. And I know you know this because I pointed it out to you when we were watching. If you watch the film Woodstock, then we probably should get to the secondary because it was 69. But that one of the songs off of that album is being played I'm assuming on the PA system or something.
Yep. Yeah, it was on the PA system.
Noise. But yeah, anyway, so really it was kind of a snapshot of a period of time. Mick Abrahams left shortly thereafter. I think he was gone within 2 months of the album being released.
Yeah, it was. I know it wasn't long.
So just as a result, it really was one of those true instances of just musical differences. Because
it almost made you wonder how they kind of even formed. I guess.
Well, I think when they started, I think there was just this idea that, hey, we're going to try and do this blues thing, but I think once they started to get a little success, I think Ian Anderson himself, and this is him saying it, not me, but he didn't want to be another. Well, he really wasn't raised middle class, but we'll say lower middle class white guy trying to emulate something that's inherently Black American.
Yeah.
He's there's bands who do it. Led Zeppelin is a perfect example of a band that can do it good and did it right.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he didn't think that he could really bring anything new to that, and he felt that it would be just a sad imitation. And that's kind of, he even thinks of This Was as kind of a sad imitation of what a white man doing Black American blues, even though there were huge influences from that. It just, and I get it. I understand that. But he wanted to do something that was a bit more English, something more in tune with his upbringing.
And their next album was definitely that.
Right. And it does have a little, the next album was 1969, Stand Up. Martin Barr comes in, taking over guitar because Mick Abrahams leaves. And this is where Ian Anderson takes over the band completely.
Yeah.
Wrote every song on the album and produced the album. I mean, this is like him taking complete control. Although he didn't produce by choice. He produced because they just couldn't find any producers that wanted to work with them or had the time.
Yeah.
I think it,
or that they'd be willing to work with,
or would they be right. In '69, they did check in with George Martin to help.
Really?
To produce.
I think I do remember reading that somewhere.
Yeah, they wanted him to produce their next album. He couldn't do it, and he said, "Well, it wasn't Stand Up. It was Benefit," because he said, "Who produced the last album?"
Yeah,
and Ian Anderson says, "Well, I did. I produced it, but he said, well, just produce again. You did all right on that one, didn't you?" Ian Anderson,
you put the cart before the horse.
Right. Ian Anderson always says he was probably just letting him down easy because he didn't want to do it.
But the interesting thing about Stand Up is, so the thing that kind of caught my eye originally, because I bought it, the first copy I bought on vinyl, I actually bought from a flea market.
Uh-huh.
And at the time I had heard Thick as a Brick, I had heard Aqualung, I had them both on vinyl, and but I hadn't heard Stand Up. At least I hadn't heard the whole album before. Mm-hmm. And I just I open up the gatefold, and it's like it opens like a children's pop-up. Mm-hmm. And it has like their picture on the inside of it.
Right. Well, it's like their actual faces, like photographs of their faces on like cartoon bodies.
Caricature bodies.
Characters' bodies, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing is about that album is that pop-up is only in the vinyl issues of that album until starting in 73, they discontinued the pop-up. And from 73 on, it was just a picture inside.
Right. Yeah, so if you had the pop-up, you had one of the earlier editions, right?
Yep. Which mine ended up in a landfill somewhere. So
I still have mine.
Oh, well.
My dad's copy.
Yeah.
So, but Stand Up, it's a very unique album for the time period too, because it does still have some blues elements to it. There's still some present, but it is like you said, where, as I was pointing out, the bringing in some more English-esque and even other ethnic type sounds, but it was the first album of Jethro Tull's that was kind of distinctly English.
Yeah.
And a side note, Ian Anderson heard, and I don't know if it's true, he doesn't know if it's true, but Eddie Vedder carries a copy of that whenever he goes on tour.
No, Eddie Vedder did confirm that. I don't think it was only just their first couple of tours.
Okay. Still, it was, it's an album with some really good songs on it.
Oh yeah. And so it also Tom Hamilton from Aerosmith said that it's one of his favorite albums.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And actually in an interview in 2015 with Brave Words, Ian Anderson said that it was his favorite album also. He said if you twisted his arm, he would say Stand Up.
That was his, yeah. And
because it was the first album that he had full creative control over.
Right. And for what it's worth, he had full control. I don't think there's a song on it that he doesn't like either.
Yeah, it's a great album.
Albums really later, he's very open about the songs he hates that he wrote.
Yeah.
He can't stand.
Yeah.
And we'll cover some of those as we get to them, because I disagree with the vast majority.
Of course you do.
I do. Because I don't understand what he's talking about when he says.
Are there any Jethro Tull songs you don't like, Ian?
I'm not a huge fan of Hot Mango Flush.
Okay, so there's one song off of 20 albums.
Some of Ian Anderson's solo album, the album Rupees Dance, the song Rupees Dance, I can't really stand either. No, I don't like the Mick Abraham songs on This Was either.
Yeah.
I don't. They're just not. I don't. They're different, and I don't know. They don't fit with how I understand Jethro Tull to be. I guess it's probably just that. But I'm not a big fan of Mick Abraham's stuff post Jethro Tull either. His Bloodwood and Pig stuff, because it's just too much blues. It's a kind of a different style of blues. It's not what I'm accustomed to. Even listening to some of the more traditional, real black artists.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for me. But
As far as like their albums go, though, I mean, their next album, Benefit, is probably my favorite Tull album.
okay, and I can see that. I think that's probably in the top 5 of most people's choices of Jethro Tull.
It's definitely a darker album, I would say,
Mhm.
than Stand Up was.
Far more introspective,
Yeah.
which is probably why Ian Anderson doesn't like a lot of songs on it. He's never been one to write songs that were more on an autobiographical level. He prefers to be more of an observer, write songs in an observational way rather than introspectively. But there's a lot of introspection going on in that album, specifically with the song Son. Obviously very much, not that him and his dad were estranged or anything, but I think there was a difference of thinking, just universal thinking between him and his father, and it's brought up several times throughout his career, but just in very minor, very subtle ways. There's a lot of songs about relationships breaking up because his first marriage was kind of on the cusp of ending. It went on for several more years, but it just, because of the touring schedule and everything else, I think he was starting to notice a decline in his first marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Songs like Alive and Well and Living In, which actually is only on, if back then, originally it was only on the British print.
Mm-hmm.
It was not on the American print pressing, which I think the song in place of it was it Inside? I think Inside wasn't on the British, but it was on the American. I don't know, it was one of those. But he hates that song. He thinks it's garbage, and I love that song. I mean, it's not. I
don't consider you the most impartial person when it comes to Jethro Tull, though. But
well, I mean, it'd be tough to find too many people, at least in the immediate vicinity of who, your people, people you're surrounded by, who've listened to these songs more than me.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't even tell you how many times I've heard each of these songs. So at least as far as being able to break them down, I'd say I may not be impartial as far as my opinion of them, but I've listened to them enough.
No, I get it.
To see what's good and what's bad in them. So
it was interesting about Benefit was that Ian Anderson said that it was a darker album mainly because the pressures that they were under, that he was under, because they were in the middle of an extensive U.S. tour, and also his frustrations with kind of the music industry as a whole at the time was really kind of where it was kind of toned down to that darker side.
Well,
which I think ended up being a great album because of that.
Well, a lot of times, I mean, there will come up with a couple other albums where there were stresses within the band and within around that area, the group of people making the music, and from their opinions, of the music, that would be lower, but I think it produced good music, maybe even arguably better than music when they're firing on all cylinders together, but there's a lot of with Benefit specifically. I think there's a lot more of experimentation going on too, but it's also a very English sounding album.
Yeah.
Kind of on par with growing from the Stand Up to Benefit. What's your favorite track on the album? Because you said it's your favorite album. I'm just curious what your favorite track on it is.
Oh shit, I'd have to look at it. Probably, I don't know. Probably, I mean, the whole first side of it, the album is really good.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, my favorite song is on the first side, but my second favorite song is on the second side.
Which one's your second favorite one on the second side?
Playing Time.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely a good one.
Yeah, because
every song on the album is good for sure.
Right. My favorite song on the album is for Michael Collins' "F.A.M.E." because it's about the it's a interesting observational song from the perspective of Michael Collins being in the LEM, while Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong were going down to the moon's surface.
Yeah.
1969. It's a very unique kind of take on that particular moment in human history, and I really enjoy that song a lot. So, But
Well, that kind of takes us to Aqualung.
right, yeah. We're now up to 1971. Jethro Tull's fourth album.
Now, it's their first It's their first platinum album in the U.S.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Both Stand Up and Benefit both went gold in the U.S., but Aqualung was their first platinum album.
Yeah. And I think Aqualung is the album that most people are going to remember them by.
Which is funny because it's not their highest charting album either. But
no, but that for some reason that's the album people are going to remember them by.
Yeah.
What is their highest charting? Isn't it Thick as a Brick?
Yeah, Thick as a Brick reached number 1.
Yeah.
Number 1 in the U.S. and number 5 in the U.K.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, Aqualung is another. I mean, there isn't. You're not going to find. I'm an apologist no matter what. There's not going to be an album that I say is bad. Aqualung is not in my top 5 of Jethro Tull albums, but like I said, it's the album that people are going to be most. It's going to be most familiar to anyone that they know Jethro Tull. They're going to know Aqualung. Mm-hmm. They may not know anything else, but they'll know Aqualung.
Surprisingly enough, there's only two singles released off of it. And it's, Hymn 43 and Locomotive Breath, which a lot of people have heard, at least people that are our age or older, I'm sure probably remember Locomotive Breath. But the song Aqualung is probably the most memorable song off the album, and it wasn't even a single off of it.
Right. Well, and what's funny is there is a company, and there was a company that made scuba gear called Aqualung.
Yeah.
They made a product they called an Aqualung.
Mm-hmm.
So Ian Anderson didn't know that when he wrote the album. And for those who don't know, it's one of the few Jethro Tull songs where lyrically it's only partially written by Ian Anderson. Yeah. He took notes. His wife at the time was a photographer, and she would take just pictures of people on the street and parks and stuff. And she had taken a picture of a homeless man, and the lyrics, specifically the first couple lines in the song Aqualung, were just notes that she had jotted down.
She had written down, yeah,
for the images. And when Ian Anderson saw those, he took those notes because they applied to that image of the homeless man that he was going for that song, or he was writing the song about.
Yeah,
and so it's one of the few songs that has a secondary writing credit on it. There's not that many in the Jethro Tull catalog, and that was one, and it's one of their biggest hits. On top of that,
it's also pretty widely considered one of like the first true concept albums. Also, even though Ian Anderson says it's not, but I can definitely see a theme through the album.
There's thematic continuations for sure, but overall, if you take out some of the themes, there's really no concept there, because you've got Aqualung, the song Aqualung, about the homeless man, Cross-Eyed Mary about the child prostitute. Their inner circles are very similar, and he's even mentioned in the song. Mm-hmm. But then you jump to Cheap Day Return, and that's a song about him going home to visit a sick dad. Yeah. And then you got Mother Goose, which is just kind of a whimsical song about, I don't even know what it's just a whimsical song. It doesn't really have any connection to the other things.
Well, outside of you, Ian Anderson, and probably the rest of the band, most people in the music community considered a concept.
Well, but I see I'm breaking that down. So I mean, we're not even through the first side of the album, and only 2 songs have a theme to them. The other songs aren't connected. So you've got Cheap Day Return, song about him going home. Mother Goose.
I think it's more. It's kind of, at least the way I understand it, it's kind of 2 different themes. Side A kind of has a theme, and side B kind of has a theme. But,
okay, well, let me continue. So you got 2 songs, and then 4 songs that have nothing to do with those 2 songs. Up to Me is not about, has no connection to those other songs. Then you jump to side 2, and you've got My God, which has a religious theme to it, or at least an opinion of religion on it. And then you've got Slipstream, or Hymn 43, again, very religious. Slipstream, God's mentioned, but it's not, there's no connection. There's no, God
you don't have to get so defensive about it. I mean, I'm just telling you what every other music critic says, at least music critic from the time.
Well, you know how, I'm sure you kind of feel the same way. Many music critics are not the ones you want to go to ask about music.
Sometimes, but a lot of the times they can be correct. I mean, I've never You're right. I don't think it's a definitive concept album like The Wall, something that's like obvious. But I think you could. I think the entire album has not only a stylistic resemblance, but it also has themes that, like you said, carry through the album. Like I said, I'm not saying that they intended to. It's not like Ian Anderson sat down and said, "You know what, I'm going to write a concept album."
Right.
I think it just kind of came across that way. But the funny thing is, that's what kind of led to Thick as a Brick.
Right. Because everyone called it a concept album, and he's like, no, it's not a concept album.
Mm-hmm.
But since you like that, I'll make it a fucking concept album.
Yeah.
We're gonna
and Thick as a Brick was deliberately over the top concept album
as a result of their opinion,
yeah,
or the opinions that were being thrown at them about Aqualung's perceived concept.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, getting into Thick as a Brick. Now, this Thick as a Brick is my favorite of all the Tull albums by far. It's
but the funny thing is, speaking of critics, at the time there were some critics that liked it, but it got like very mixed reviews. But the funny thing is, like in retrospect, I think Thick as a Brick, I think, is widely considered one of the best and greatest progressive rock albums of the 70s.
It's by a lot of standards, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, so you agree with the critics on that part? I'm just double checking. Thanks, Ian.
No, I'm agreeing because I've heard that from people who aren't critics. They're fans. They're progressive rock fans, and and Thick as a Brick ranks very high in a lot of these groups.
Yeah,
it's
their first number one album in the U.S. also.
Mm-hmm. And really, it's kind of strange because it's a concept album, mm-hmm. but the concept of the album is on the outside of the album. It's not in the music. It's not in the song itself. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? The concept is that the words to Thick as a Brick were written by this fictional character called Gerald Bostock, who was an 8-year-old mm-hmm. boy. Actually, he was 10 years old. Pretended to be 8 to win a under 10 or a youth poetry competition. Won it for the epic poem Thick as a Brick. The award was taken away from him under controversy, and the band Jethro Tull is going to make an album with that poem as their lyrics to the song. That's the whole concept of the album. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, they made this very unique album cover that opens up and is a full-blown newspaper.
Yeah.
A fictional newspaper called the Linwell or St. Cleve Chronicle, and it's mm-hmm. Linwell Publishing. And every article in the paper was written by a different member of the band, and it was put together to make it look like a very small English town periodical. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think the album cover is more unique than the album concept itself.
Well, I would agree with that.
Yeah. And Ian Anderson has been quoted as saying it took them longer to put the album cover together than it did to record the actual album. They recorded the album in just under 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And that's from beginning, and Ian was writing the music as they were rehearsing and recording.
Yeah.
And if you listen to the album, if you've never listened to the album, I mean, obviously there's going to be people who can't tolerate a 45-minute long song, essentially. And that's what it is. The song is 45 minutes. It's broken into 2 parts, but it is essentially one 45-minute long song. And a lot of people, I don't know if they can keep if their attention span can go that far.
A funny little story about this album, though, real quick. Yeah. I'm sure obviously you know this, but mm-hmm. So Ian and I, back in the day, we used to go to a pool hall on like a Thursday night, and we'd, play pool and drink beer and kind of just hang out. And mm-hmm. they had one of those jukeboxes where you could like pay and you could play whatever song you wanted.
It was like an internet jukebox.
Yeah. So we would put on Thick as a Brick and then leave. Because then no one could play any songs for the next 45 fucking minutes. It was terrible. It was great. I'm sure people fucking hated us.
Yeah. Well, what was worse is I actually did that in yeah, you froze there for a second. I did that. You did here. Johnny's Barn Grill in Belleville on the lake, which I think just closed, by the way. Mm-hmm. I did the same thing in there with a Dream Theater song
Oh, really?
The title track to the Octavarium album, Octavarium. The
Yeah.
song is like 30 minutes long, and it is pure progressive metal. And I put that on, and
You're such an asshat.
about 5 minutes into the album, I was like, all right, let's get out of here.
That's great.
And the song had to play for another 25 minutes.
Um,
I feel we were doing the Pool Hall a favor by playing Thick as a Brick, because it's a fantastic song.
Now, as far as like vinyl and stuff goes, there's actually an interesting thing. I don't know if you know this or not, but so there's a Spanish pressing from '76. It's on the Chrysalis Green label, and it has a continuous side B, but it doesn't have a continuous side A. There's actually side A is broken up into 5 separate tracks, and it actually is missing some musical interludes and lyrics.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that. I do
Yep,
know that
yep.
Thick as a Brick was the last album to be first pressed on the Reprise label, other than the Chrysalis label.
Yep.
Which
that was actually in my notes here also, but
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the Brick was the last one.
Yeah, I was gonna say though, if people listening to this are actually interested in that album, the serial number is 89794-IE, and it runs. You can pick up a VG or VG Plus copy on Discogs for about $35, but if you're looking for if you want like a near mint copy of it, it'll run you about $120. If you're into like variants and things like that. But
yeah, I wouldn't mind a variant, but I don't want one that's missing music. You know,
some people are completists and they kind of like to have like those odd different things that, like I said, probably there's probably a lot of people out there probably don't know about that.
Possibly. Yeah, I didn't know about that. I knew about the Reprise labeling, and because after that, I think even Aqualung and then the other albums, when they were repressed under the Chrysalis label, not under the Reprise label.
Yeah.
But when they were originally pressed, they were pressed under Reprise, which was a Warner Brothers, I think, subsidiary.
Yeah, it is. It is.
So, and ironically, now they're back under the Warner Brothers umbrella.
Umbrella.
Yeah. But yeah, so Thick as a Brick also was unique, and when they went out to perform it live, they performed the whole album from beginning to end live. 45. It actually turned out to be closer to, I think, 55 minutes, because they actually added in a lot more theatrics, because it was a bit more of a theatrical performance for them.
Yeah,
they had like little interludes and things like that. One moment where I think it's in between Thick as a Brick Part 1 and Part 2, they have the band do like a news report, like a weather report and stuff.
Yeah.
And kind of a funny thing, it was really a take on what Monty Python was doing in the late 60s, and very kind of British type of humor. And again, this is all quotes from Ian Anderson himself. They really kind of tried to bring a bit of English humor to the performances and to the show. In the middle of a song, Ian would just stop the music, and it was always a different point in the show, because the phone would be ringing and he would answer the phone, and I forgot who the character it was, and they'd ask for, and then someone would come out in a scuba suit with an aqualung, a scuba tank on, out, take the phone and answer it and walk off the stage. It was the play on the Aqualung thing.
Yeah.
So just a little bit of theatrics, but if you listen to the music, there's a lot of complex stuff going on in that music, and to be able to learn it, play it every night for a year and a half in its entirety, says a lot about the group of guys playing this music, in my opinion. And I'm not alone. That's not just a fan blowing smoke. There's a lot of bands that couldn't have done that.
It's definitely a long piece of music to play. That's for damn sure.
Right, and a lot of different changes going on that are not they're natural when you hear them, but they're not natural to change when you're just playing it straight through.
Yeah.
So, that's probably one of the reasons why it's my favorite Jethro Tull album. Now, coming off of that album and off the success of that album, I think the intention was always to do another concept album, but they went with the intention of not doing another 45-minute long song.
Yeah.
And the tax code in Britain was draconian at best. The On earned income, it was 87% of your earned income was taxed. And on unearned income, meaning investments and things like that, it was 98%. So as a result, their accountants and their managers just convinced the band to go into what's called tax exile. All the British bands,
they all did at the time.
They all did it. The Stones, the Beatles, everyone did it back then. So they went to France, and well, actually, they tried to get citizenship or residency in Switzerland, and then while they were waiting for that to go through, they were in France, and that's where they were attempting to record their next album. And they got about 50 minutes worth of music recorded in this place that they ended up getting food poisoning multiple times. The equipment kept breaking down. It was all broken when they got there. And because it was out in the country, it took forever to get people out to fix the equipment. So it was just one thing after another. They ended up getting their Swiss citizenship and the very next day flying back to England.
Yeah.
Because they just couldn't do it anymore. And when they got back, they decided, Ian Anderson said, you know what, we're just going to scrap everything we've done and we're just going to do a whole new album. And aside from a few musical concepts, which you know of, what we get is a passion play. That's the next album. What was left behind was affectionately referred to as the Chateau Disaster tapes because it was recorded in the Chateau de Horval.
Yeah, something like that.
Which is also where Elton John had recorded Honky Tonk something. I forgot what the name of that album is. And Cat Stevens recorded Catch a Bullet 4 there.
Yeah.
So it wasn't. It was a place that other artists had used, but it was just trash by the time they got to it. So,
and they recorded some decent music there too. But
yes, and in my opinion, now granted, I have the benefit of hindsight here.
Yeah,
I think some of the musical themes that were present on the Chateau Disaster tapes are better than what they came up with for Passion Play.
I would agree.
That being said,
I would think, and I would say a lot of critics probably agree with you also.
Well,
because the critics absolutely hated the album.
Right. I don't think they really got it. But that being said, the band didn't really like the album either.
Yeah.
Overall,
but the funny thing is, even with all the negative reviews that the album had, it still reached number 1 in the US. And actually this album got so much bad publicity that the band actually had to do press conferences afterwards to explain where the band was going to go in the future.
Right. Well, Terry Ellis had came up with this idea to keep the name of the band in the papers. He said that they're going to quit as a result of their bad press, which is not what's going to happen. So Ian Anderson had to go and correct that the very next day, and as a result had to do a bunch of press conferences to say, look, we're not getting the best reviews, but we're not giving up, you know.
Yeah, oh yeah. There's a couple of ones I saw. The Melody Maker, who was a big, they were a big reviewer at the time, said that when they were in their review for the album, it said, "Music must touch the soul. A passion play rattles with emptiness." That's that's a pretty bad one. And another one review said it was the album was the fall of Jethro Tull. Rolling Stone said it was a pop potpourri of Paradise Lost and Winnie the Pooh, among many other
that's pretty accurate, actually.
Among other literary resources, not to mention a vast array of musical ideas, derivative of influences as far-flung as Purcell, flamenco, and modern jazz. And the final judge of the album is an expensive, tedious, nonsense piece of music. That's a bad review.
The first part of it's pretty accurate, though. Yeah. I mean, it is. The lyrics are essentially a modern day retelling of Paradise Lost, as far as the journey through the afterlife. And then if you throw in the hare who lost his spectacles, that's the Winnie the Pooh part of it, for sure.
I mean, I kind of agree with some of the reviews. I mean, I definitely feel that this album and their next album were the low points of the 70s for the band, but
really, you feel that way about War Child as well?
Oh, they're both good albums. Don't get me wrong. I like both albums, but compared to everything else that they released in the 70s, I think it was definitely subpar.
Yeah, the band themselves,
especially since I've
iconic.
gone I've had a bit, like you said, in retrospect, I've heard the stuff that they recorded
Right.
originally, because originally though it was going to be a double album.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what it was, a double album. It would be a double album of standalone songs, but still have a singular concept. But which a
Real
lot of
quick,
that concept did filter into Passion Play and War Child as well. But
yeah, real quick, I do need to say, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're wondering why I'm playing with a screwdriver, it's because I broke my microphone stand, and like my stand comes apart.
mm-hmm.
So before we started recording, I was trying to fix it, and it was just, I needed something to fidget with, so I was playing with my screwdriver.
Right. Well,
Just in case you're watching this, like, why the hell does he have a screwdriver in his hand?
we could have just pointed out that you always have a screwdriver in your hand because you're always waiting for that one moment where you're going to snap and stab me
you in the damn eye.
Because we know it's coming. It's bound to come eventually.
Eventually.
Yeah. So, so where we leave off. So, Passion Play came out, and again they went out on tour and did it all from beginning to end.
Yeah.
The band overall is not terribly happy with that album.
But saying that though, like, a lot of the reviews, I read some pretty harsh reviews of the album, but reviews in retrospect, I think, have definitely been more friendly to the album than they definitely were when it was released.
Yes, it's definitely an album that over time has earned respect.
Yeah.
Even from critics who panned it back then have come along and said, I was really harsh on that album.
Yeah.
I get it. I love the album, but anyone who says that it's a low point or their least favorite album by the band, I don't question it. I don't criticize it, because I can understand why some people have issues with that album. Again, though, I have the benefit of hindsight, and when I listen to it, I can actually listen to now the Chateau Disaster album, which it's an album now, and listen to Passion Play, and together they almost kind of make the double album that was intended, in a sense.
Yeah.
Because even though the Chateau Disaster tapes, the theme wasn't going for a Paradise Lost type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was using the theater as a representation for life.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas and then Passion Play is the play, which is the death, the afterlife.
Yeah.
So it by accident, purely by accident, it becomes that double album that maybe would have been to some degree would have been what we would have gotten if the Chateau Disaster tapes had continued.
Yeah.
So.
And also a Passion Play kind of marked the beginning of the steep decline as far as charting goes in the UK. Because I mean, coming off of Thick as a Brick, which was 5 in the UK, the Passion Play dropped down to 16. And they kind of stayed the same thing with their next album, which was 14. But then they dropped down to 20, 25. I mean, so it's like,
yeah, they never really hit number ones ever again.
No.
So I mean, at least in the mainstream.
But this kind of marked where it kind of flip flopped. Where they were prior to this, they were charting generally higher in the UK than they were in the US, and after this, they were charting higher in the US than they were in the UK.
I think with Thick as a Brick, even though the humor was probably a bit different and this was again something Ian Anderson has said. He wasn't entirely sure if the American audiences got the humor of Thick as a Brick. And he noticed that the Japanese definitely didn't get it.
Well, yeah.
But people liked it enough, and there was enough, because of that, say, Monty Python-ish type of humor that it was likable enough to, even if you didn't get it, you kind of still liked it. Whereas with Passion Play, there's no humor in it. At all. So it's difficult to get your mind through those complex changes if you're not sold on the concept or along for the ride, because you're really trying to just sit and think about what is going on. What is this all about? Because it is dark.
No, I get it.
It's darker. Yeah. So I think overall, if Thick as a Brick is a hit, Passion Play is kind of the counterpoint. It's like the light in the dark of that period. That concept, overblown, super progressive rock Jethro Tull version. You have your light side and your dark side, and you can either like them or not like them.
Yeah.
But with that, so going into War Child, which was 1974, a lot of themes that Ian Anderson was playing with Passion Play, he was kind of jotting down these ideas from a theatrical standpoint, and was actually kind of thinking that maybe they could come up with a movie. And
yeah, it was actually originally it was intended to be a double album and with an accompanying film, and they actually brought in John Cleese to as the humor consultant for the film that was going to go along with War Child.
Right, because I think they were shooting for something, which, you know, years later, Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, I think, did better than Jethro Tull could have done ever. Was this idea of, you know, good versus evil on a humor scale, you know. With Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, they did the book Good Omens.
Yeah.
And then it's the end of the world is about to happen, and these two angels who've been living on Earth, one's an angel, one's a demon, decide they don't really want, they're the ones who have to kind of get things going, and they don't want it to end. They're like, well, we're kind of having fun here. Let's, you know.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of the concept that Ian Anderson was going with. He was going for this dichotomy between God and Satan fighting over, you know, man's eternal soul, but there being some kind of a humor to it, like a you know, comedy of errors sort of thing.
Yeah.
But a lot of music was written, orchestral music was written for the proposed film.
Yeah.
But when all the film stuff fell through, they were left with, okay, well, we're a band, let's just put out another album. And some of the musical themes found their way into the War Child album. And one could argue that even saying that Chateau Disaster and Passion Play could be two albums and a double album, War Child could actually be connected to it as a trilogy of albums, because you've got the theater as representing life in Chateau Disaster. You've got the actual play representing the afterlife. War Child is the societal side of it, and things that lead us to the mistakes that are made for those other two things. And music, and thematically and musically, there's a lot of wraparound there that you don't find in any of the other Tull albums before or after those three albums. You know, specifically, even just in certain choices for instruments, alto sax. There's a lot of sax in Passion Play, and there's a lot of sax in War Child. And I can tell you this, I don't know why he did it in War Child, but in Passion Play, when Steve Wilson was getting ready to do his mix of that, Ian Anderson told him or asked him if he'd be willing to take all the sax out.
Oh, really?
Out of Passion Play, yeah. And Steven Wilson didn't want to. He wanted to try and keep it as original as possible. So he did a comparison, and there really wouldn't have worked unless Ian Anderson had put flute into it as a secondary thing. And he had already done that with the Chateau Disaster tapes, and Steve Wilson didn't like that. He took all that flute out of the Chateau Disaster tapes, which, for better or worse, I don't like it. It feels empty now. It's just demos now. But so if you listen to Chateau Disaster, listen to the Nightcap version.
Which is that's always the version I like.
Right. I like what Steve Wilson did. I like some of his choices. Yeah. And there are some tracks that I will listen to his versions over the Nightcap versions. But overall, any track that's flute heavy, don't listen to the Steve Wilson versions, because it's like listening to a demo, and I couldn't take it. But with War Child, though, I would say that the critics were definitely, I'd say, equally as harsh on this album, especially Rolling Stone. Man, I don't know who the reviewer was for Rolling Stone, but they really, not only did they hate A Passion Play, I think they equally hated War Child. The one review I pulled up, it said. Says each handcrafted track comes chock full of schmaltz, strings, tutti frutti sound effects, and flute toots to boot, not to mention Anderson's warbling lyricism. Remember, tall rhymes with doll. Wow. See, I again, War Child's another album where people, if they don't really get it or like it, I don't really fault anyone for that.
Hey, you know what, though? Even with the reviews they got, it still hit number 2 in the U.S. It went gold.
And it has one of their heaviest rotated songs, at least in American radio, on it, which is Bungle in the Jungle. It's not really my favorite song, but
no, it's not.
It gets heavy rotation, and even to this day. which, you know, they were better or worse.
Yeah.
But overall, I like War Child because I think Martin's playing is top notch in it. I mean, not to the extent that we get in 75, the next album, but I think Martin's guitar playing was really toned back for Passion Play.
Mm-hmm.
At least for Passion Play, not Chateau Disaster, for Passion Play for sure.
Yeah.
And I think in War Child, we get more good heavy riffs from Martin, more real guitar in there. And there's a lot less sax, which is good. But there's some just really good songs on it. You know, maybe having the single song structure is a better option, because I think he could have just as easily have run all those songs together. A couple songs even do kind of run together.
Mm-hmm.
But I think having them as separate pieces really kind of really works for that album.
Yeah. So. But the funny thing is, then you get into Minstrel in the Gallery, which is
1975.
I mean, if Benefit isn't my favorite, it would have to be Minstrel. I mean, yeah, it's a fantastic album.
And Minstrel
from beginning to end.
Yeah, Minstrel comes in as a very, very close second to Thick as a Brick's number one.
And it was, I think, musically, it was much more in line with what they were doing in the beginning of the 70s or late 60s, early 70s. It's more like stand-up Benefit, Aqualung than it is anything like War Child or anything that came after that.
Absolutely, and a lot of it comes from the fact that it's kind of an Ian Anderson solo album to start.
Yeah,
I mean it's a band effort once everything's out there, but that album started life really just Ian Anderson with a guitar, and that was it. Mm-hmm. Right when he wrote that, I mean, he didn't go in like with Thick as a Brick, with Passion Play, with War Child. Went in with, okay, every day comes in, okay, I've got this little piece of music, let's work on this. Or I got these lyrics, I want to work this out.
Yeah, he came in with more complete songs.
This was, he wrote most of the music and said, okay, let's do it. But this is it. And there's a lot more instrumental, or not instrumental, but a lot more acoustic pieces on this album as well.
And I think it really worked. I mean, even I hate going back to the critics, but the critics really, really enjoyed the album.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as they should. I mean, it is a better album than War Child. It is a better album than Passion Play.
Yeah.
There's no question about that.
And it's also Jeffrey Hammond's last album.
It is Jeffrey Hammond's last album. And that was expressed to Ian while the album was being made. That I'll do this album and I'll do a tour.
Then I'm done.
Because at the end of the day, Jeffrey Hammond was not a musician.
Yeah.
Considering how little he understood music and how little of a musician he was, he's a fantastic player.
Yeah.
And basically, he was one of those musicians where you show him what to do and he can do it.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what they did. Because everyone else in the band had musical training.
Yeah.
So they'd say, okay, well, you know, we're writing this, do this. But okay, I can do that. Boom, boom, boom. And he could do it. And he did it very well. In fact, I think some of his bass lines are some of the best in all the recordings at all. He's not the best bassist. Glenn Cornick
was the best bass player they had.
But some of the bass lines, because I mean, obviously we don't know what Glenn Cornick would have done with the bass lines for Thick as a Brick or or Minstrel in the Gallery. But some of the bass lines that Jeffrey had to do, for someone who isn't a musician, quite complex and quite good. Mm-hmm. Especially now that we have the benefit of listening to the Steve Wilson remixes where everything's kind of balanced and you can hear the bass lines way better. And I was actually telling you this the other day when I listened to War Child. There's some bass lines in there that I never even heard before. Mm-hmm. I'm like, wow, that's really good. It's not just bass following beat, you know. There's real bass going on there, real as an instrument, not just a background instrument. Because you know what they always say: if a good bass player, you don't know they're there. And that's I
wouldn't say that.
I've heard several musicians say that, but I don't agree with it.
I think, now I might be wrong because I'm a bass player, but I think like some of the best players, take Flea for example. I mean, it's like I don't think he's ever played a song where the bass wasn't a key part of the music.
But you have to understand that that's us. That's us coming into. I'm talking about if you look back at like jazz bands and old swing bands, you don't really.
Oh man, bullshit with jazz. Bass is definitely a big part of jazz.
I'm just telling you what people say. I don't agree with it. I've heard multiple people say that. That saying is old shit.
And as far as like, I mean, Jeffrey Hammond was, I think, a serviceable bass player. I think a more skilled bass player probably could have done a lot more with the
Maybe.
space he was given.
Perhaps.
But I was never really impressed by his bass work. He was a kind of a flamboyant kind of guy. He was definitely a character on stage, more so than probably anyone before or really after him really was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but his first love was painting, and I mean that's
Yeah.
what he's done since he left Tull.
Yeah,
is he's a painter. So that's he was there really as just Glenn left the band and Ian needed a bass player, and Jeffrey came along because he was his friend, and he could do what they asked him to do.
He'd played in the band before,
and he had been with some of those guys before,
a previous incarnation,
right? With Barry Barlow, who was on drums, they'd all been there. John Evans, they'd all been there. So it was kind of the old boys club.
Yeah.
So Minstrel in the Gallery was is in a top-notch level as far as the category of Tull catalog.
Yeah. It has my favorite Jethro Tull song on it for sure.
Which is Baker Street Muse. Yeah, I mean, it's an example, and this is actually a quote from Ian Anderson. If he wishes he could have written Baker Street Muse before he wrote Passion Play, because he said that Baker Street Muse was us doing a long-form song the right way.
Yeah,
and he really felt that was more of what Passion Play should have been.
Yeah. No, I get it.
Stripped down. It could still be long and still have the musical changes in it. Mm-hmm. But because Baker Street Muse is the third longest song Tull's ever had. It's 16 and a half minutes.
Yep. It doesn't feel that long when you listen to it, though.
No, it really doesn't. It really flows very well.
Yeah.
And I would agree, it's probably the best song on that album for sure.
Now, getting into their next album, which is Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die, it's got some good songs on it, but I was never a huge fan of this album either.
Mm-hmm. This is, it was kind of Ian Anderson's, not an answer to or a rebuttal of, but an acceptance of what was kind of growing in the music industry.
Yeah.
And it was the punk thing. Tull had been what is considered a progressive rock band now at this point for 5 years. They were wrapped up in the likes of bands like Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Very out there, very extravagant music in terms of, whether good or bad, but music that is not anywhere near mainstream.
Yeah.
And you've got these kids coming out who barely play an instrument in a garage, and they're rocking out with 2-minute long songs that have, no chord progression whatsoever. Just just punk. What we know is punk. And the album is a concept album.
It's their last concept album.
It's their last concept album. I would argue that it's not, but it is.
It is
their last official. But and the concept is basically the old rocker, the old.
Well, I would say it kind of goes beyond that. I would say it's more about how the music industry and music business is cyclical. And even as music styles fall out of fashion, they kind of eventually come back around and are popular again, or so they kind of thought so at the time.
Well, and that's true.
Because
things proven it to be true.
Things like disco kind of never were popular again. Thank God.
Really though, if you think about it, a lot of the pop music is very disco-y. It's all about that dance music, Yeah,
I guess so.
Songs that you can dance to. That's never ever gone away.
Or I guess you're right, because it kind of did morph into new wave and then things like that.
Oh no. New wave was probably more of a morph out of light progressive rock more than disco.
No, I would say 80s new wave music definitely had a disco taste to it.
I think it had more of a progressive taste to it. Yeah. I think you really have to.
We'll just have to disagree on that one.
Well, I think you don't dig. You're looking at the surface of it. I think you need to dig deeper into some of that new wave stuff. No, I'm dead serious. I listen to that shit. Do you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you find yourself listening to Duran Duran all the time?
Not all the time. I do like some Duran Duran. I mean, I'm not a big fan of 80s music in general, but I used to.
See, I like that stuff.
I used to. I mean, I grew up listening to that stuff.
Yeah, I would say that there's probably more in common with progressive music than it is with disco. But there's a lot of pop from the 80s that I would say is definitely more influenced by disco, but not the new wave.
Because I think disco had always had a pop flavor to it, because pop music existed before
Oh,
disco music did.
of
But
course, rock has there's a lot of rock that has a pop flavor to it, but just because it's pop doesn't mean it's
hello,
influenced subtly.
Nickelback.
Right, exactly. But that's you wouldn't say that that's disco esque.
Yeah,
Is what I'm saying is musically speaking, if you really listen to it, new wave has more of a connection to what light progressive was in the 70s more than what disco was in the 70s.
sure. Okay, if you say so.
I'll give you a list of songs to listen to prove
And
my
I'm sure I've
point.
listened to all of them.
I doubt it, but
You do
seriously,
understand I have a extremely wide musical background.
name one song by Duran Duran that's not "Hungry Like a Wolf" or "Rio."
I don't know. Those are two great songs, though.
They are good songs, you know.
Well, like I
So
said, I don't listen to them anymore, but I grew up listening to
right,
them. So yeah,
right.
I've heard all that shit before.
So okay, but I mean that aside, you're right though. As far as what was going on with Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die was the concept of
I would say it's a
this,
muddled
this
concept for sure, but
well, I think it plays out in a much more clear cut
I mean,
concept than Thick as a Brick and Passion Play.
I understand where the concept was going, but I feel like a lot of people didn't.
Which is silly because if you own the record, you open it up, there's a comic strip that shows you
I
the
know.
concept. It's
I
all
got it.
right there.
I
It's
know.
very more clear cut than Thick as a Brick and Passion Play, and definitely more clear cut as a concept than Aqualung ever could be.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't
I
understand
don't know
how you
about
wouldn't have
that.
any
Well,
trouble.
I don't know. I see Aqualung definitely as a concept album, but okay.
I think you're just like to be contrarian, but
No,
you
not at
do.
all.
Shut up! You're being contrarian right now.
All right, let's move on to the next album.
We'll see this, and this is where Tull kind of becomes more of what it really what Ian Anderson wanted it to be. And that's I mean, it's not he doesn't like folk, but it is more English. This is the most English album you're ever
Well,
gonna get from the
their
band.
next three albums, I mean, they consider them a folk
Folk
trilogy.
trilogy. And I would disagree with that to a
Really?
degree. Yeah.
Maybe with Stormwatch, but
Right.
definitely Songs from the Wood and Heavy Horses. I feel like you can really
There's a lot of folk
you
elements there.
you could almost put those two albums together
Really?
musically. Oh
I
yeah.
think
And
I think you should,
I love both the albums, but
right. I think you should listen to them back to back one day because you're right. There's a lot of similarity, but there's a lot of difference too. Heavy Horses is a
of
much
course,
darker.
they're two separate albums, Ian.
Right.
Obviously, there's difference to it, but I'm saying they're musically they're both similar albums, more so than what Stormwatch is in the quote unquote folk trilogy.
Right. No, I guess I can agree with that. But yeah, Songs from the Wood, and one thing that you should point out, Songs from the Wood was the first time, probably since Thick as a Brick, that it was a very band united album. Everyone kind of came in with certain musical ideas over what Ian had written, those demos that Ian had given them, and kind of really became part of the process, the recording process.
It's definitely a much better. It's a lot better of a constructed album musically for sure than Too Old to Rock and Roll was.
Oh, by far, I won't disagree with that.
And by the way, I mentioned Rolling Stone earlier. Rolling Stone said that in their review of this album that it was probably their best album ever.
Yeah.
Well, at the time,
Songs from the Wood is in my top 5. It's probably number 5 actually, of the Tull catalog.
And it had really, I mean, unanimously positive reviews for this album.
Yeah. Overall, yeah, it was I wouldn't say a huge success as far as charting goes, but it was a huge success as far as
it was number 8 in the US and 13 in the UK. So it was their highest charting album in the UK since Thick as a Brick.
Okay. Yeah. So that says a lot, really. And I think it was kind of the band if you follow the band from its beginning to today, there's this odd like ebb and flow with popularity with the band.
Mm-hmm.
They're 1 minute they're very out of out of favor or not, no one gives a shit about them. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, look, there's that band, Jethro Tull. They're really good.
They become relevant again.
Yeah, it's oddly relevant, and where they weren't 2 years ago. You know what I mean? Back then it was within a couple of years. Now it's decades. But it's that was the period, kind of a peak of or a new peak of popularity for them, where they were on all the hit pop shows, you know, getting, you know, Top of the Pops and all that fun shit. And I don't know. I mean, I know you like the album. What do you think about it? I mean, I could say tons of stuff about it, but I think musically, I think it's Ian Anderson at his best in terms of structure, and it's the band at its best of bringing that structure to.
No, I completely agree.
To fruition.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So, okay, yeah.
But the interesting thing was, you know, you were talking about punk and stuff like that earlier with their next album, Heavy Horses. You know, it was musical trends definitely in 78 were moving to a new era. They're moving in a completely new direction. And with like I said, with punk and the emergence of new wave, and the band with Heavy Horses made a very concerted effort to not appear as though they were moving in a similar direction. They said, you know, look, everyone's going off over here to the left. We're going to stay in our little pocket right here.
Yep.
And that's kind of why I say I put Heavy Horses and Songs from the Wood kind of together, because it was an effort to kind of say, look, I understand that the music industry is pulling everything to a different direction. Not really the industry, but listeners are pulling music in a different direction, and we're just kind of going to stay right here. And Heavy Horses, and it was Heavy Horses was the second album in a row that garnered very positive, overwhelming reviews. So they succeeded in what they were trying to do.
Oh, I agree, and I don't think they've ever really followed what the mainstream was doing.
We will get to that, because I will argue with you on that one. But
okay.
here in a couple
curious
albums.
to hear what you have to argue. But yeah, Heavy Horses is unique to me in a way, because I find that for a long time I actually thought Heavy Horses was a very subpar album to Songs from the Wood.
Really?
Yeah, I always found it kind of jarring in certain places. However, as I've grown older, I think I appreciate Heavy Horses slightly more overall, because I think musically, again, it's kind of like they go through these phases where they hit a stride and they never want to repeat themselves.
Yeah.
But that stride does follow through to a degree, and it's either better than before or not as good. So Passion Play, Thick as a Brick Passion Play would be the example of the finding a stride but not succeeding coming up. Whereas I think with the Songs from the Wood to Heavy Horses, it's kind of the reverse, where they found this moment where, okay, these are the songs I'm writing as Ian Anderson. This is the songs I'm writing. These are the topics I'm addressing. And once he gets to the Heavy Horses side of it, he's kind of in the flow of things, and I think it's hitting better. Some of his opinions, because Heavy Horses is very socially driven too, and a lot of his opinions are really coming through as far as agriculture, environmental issues, and that really plays into Stormwatch.
Yeah.
But it really, I think he's firing in all cylinders writing wise. Once you hit Heavy Horses, there are times I go back and forth and think Heavy Horses is actually a better album than Songs from the Wood.
No, they're both fantastic albums equally.
But
and then we kind of come to the third part of that, you know, quote unquote folk trilogy, and I don't fully get where they're going with Stormwatch. I mean, there's definitely folk elements to it, but it's definitely not as folk rock as either of the two albums before it.
No, far more rock, heavier rock flow to it. That being said, if you had to take those three albums as a trilogy, my favorite of those three is Stormwatch.
Really?
Actually, now that I think about it, yeah. Stormwatch is, because if I were to label, Thick as Brick's my number one, Minstrel Gallery's number 2. Stormwatch is my number 3.
Yeah.
For whatever it's worth, this is, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, but this is an area where the band was in a bit of turmoil at this point.
Mm-hmm.
John Glasscock, who had taken over for bass for Jeffrey
Hammond, yep.
Yeah, was ill.
Yeah, he had a heart defect.
He had a heart defect and was getting considerably worse, but he also wasn't changing his lifestyle at all too.
No.
He was drinking heavily, and
he only appeared on a couple of songs on the album.
Right. But it was really stressing the band out because they had come, I mean, he'd only been there since 75, late 75. Mm-hmm. We're now at late 78, early 79.
Yeah.
And he'd really integrated himself as a member of the band. All those guys became good friends with him. But I don't think they really knew how to talk to him and try to get him to stop. You know, you've got a heart problem. You shouldn't be drinking.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be smoking as much. You shouldn't be out partying all hours of the night. I mean, he wasn't like the traditional rock star druggie or anything, but he was living way above what his body could handle.
A very poor lifestyle, considering his health.
Exactly. And not being available and not being there, and the band not wanting to fire him either.
Yeah.
Even though they, in retrospect, a lot of the members, Barry Barlow has said it, Martin Barr has said it, Ian Anderson said it, they probably should have fired him.
Yeah.
In the hopes that it would wake him up.
Which it wouldn't have.
It probably wouldn't have. But ultimately, he ended up dying that year. Mm-hmm. And from that.
He died like what, 2 months? I want to say like 2 months after the album was released.
It was either on either side of the album being released. Yeah, I don't know if it was before or after, but
let's see here. It was released September of 79, and where's his name at on here? And he died November of 79.
Okay, so
it was 2 months.
But those health problems had even gone back to late 78 because the Jethro Tull had done the first transatlantic live broadcast in October of 78 from Madison Square Garden. And John Glasscock does not play on that show. It's Tony Williams playing bass on that show. So his health problems have been consistently going on for well over a year at this point.
Yeah.
And it really took a toll on the band. It took a toll on Ian a lot because he actually kind of felt responsible
for it. Yeah.
And just for not doing more. Mm-hmm. It was more responsible in an apathy kind of way. He felt like, what he didn't really know. He should have done more. He feels maybe he should have. I don't know, but
it wouldn't have changed anything. But
but you can't. It's hard to think about those things. It's hard to say what could I have done differently and would it have changed anything because you don't know the answer to either one of those questions.
I will say this, that I feel that Stormwatch to me is it definitely marks the end of an incredible decade for Jethro Tull, where they made some really iconic music. And I feel that they really spend much of the next decade really trying to rediscover that same magic that they had in the 70s.
I would say they spend the next decade trying to figure out who they are more than where they fit in.
And the reason why I say they kind of rediscover it is because we will get to it eventually, but I feel like they kind of did go back to that earlier sound with Catfish Rising in 91. Yeah. And that's why I kind of say they kind of, and the same thing with Rooster Branches in 95. It had a much more 70s sound than anything they did in the 80s. But we'll get
to those. Yeah. After Stormwatch, I mean, I want to say a little bit more about it, just in the sense that there are some musical things going on in Stormwatch that I don't think the band had done before, and I don't think they've ever done since.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, Stormwatch comes in at a strong number 3 in my top 5 of Jethro Tull albums, for sure. Without question and without fail.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who disagree with me. I don't fault anyone for that.
That's why everyone has their own opinion.
Right. Well, just because you have an opinion doesn't mean it's right. And if they have an opinion that's if you
different from yours.
Well, for example, if you told me that you hated Stormwatch and you gave me reasons why you didn't like it, okay, then there's no reason I can argue with it. But there's people who would say I don't like Stormwatch because it's the end of the 70s. It's not Aqualung. Those
Well,
kind of opinions I don't
I
have any respect for.
I would say that I wasn't a huge fan of this album for a long time. I never felt it was a bad album. It was just eh.
Yeah.
I never really. I don't know. It's definitely an album that's grown on me over the years, for
Right.
sure.
Well, and you've just recently purchased this special edition vinyl.
Yeah, I actually got mine before you did, Chucklehead.
Yeah, by 2 weeks actually.
I know.
I just got mine when this is being released a week ago.
Yeah.
Well, but you've listened to it recently, and as have I.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean, has your opinion really changed about it since you've been able to listen to it now through the lens of Steve Wilson's remix too? Because I got to admit, he did a great job on this.
He did do a good job, and I feel that I don't think it's a really huge difference than the original.
No,
album.
it's very subtle. It is very subtle.
It is. It's not so like if you go back and listen to Steve Wilson's remix of Aqualung, I
That's
feel it's
huge.
a much more drastic change than what the original was.
Right.
And Steve Wilson's remix of Aqualung is fantastic.
Yes,
but yeah, I don't feel there was that much of a difference. It's still a good album.
No, it's very subtle, but I noticed that it's finding those balances with, like I said, with bass lines, guitar issues, and flute too. Some of the flute was brought up to a slightly higher level, and everything really just works great. And again, I can't say enough about Steve Wilson's remixes. I wish he would go further and do more, but it's not like
he probably won't. Yeah, he probably won't. All right, let's get into the.
Well,
this is where we kind of diverge because I am not a fan of their music in the 80s.
Okay.
Overall, like I said, I'm gonna open my other.
That's fine.
Pepsi here.
We
trying to not make it so loud, but
well, let me start it out with at the end of '79 and into early '80, the band was touring, promoting the Stormwatch album. Ian Anderson decided he wanted to make a solo album, and ultimately, it wasn't a matter of I'm better than anybody else or any of that stuff. It was just
a change.
He wanted to work. He wanted to work with different musicians.
Yeah.
For a change, which I completely get. So he went and started writing songs. He did recruit Martin Barr. He originally only recruited him to work on one song. But he ended up working on other songs because he couldn't find another guitar player who was free. He wanted to work with Jimmy Page, wasn't available because they were still. I think Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin was still touring for they're doing their last tour.
Yeah.
So he couldn't get Jimmy Page. I think he had even asked. I want to say he'd asked Brian May.
Really?
I think so. I think he asked Brian May and at least two other guitarists, but the two big ones were Plant and
Jimmy Page.
Jimmy Page and Brian May.
Yeah.
But neither one of them were available. They were all touring with their own bands. So he basically ended up asking Martin to work on one song, but then Martin just kept working on other songs.
Yeah.
But he brought in a new keyboard player. He brought in a new drummer. And he used Dave Pegg, who had taken over for John Glasscock just on the tour for Stormwatch. And I wouldn't say that's a Tull connection because he'd been playing with the band for 6 months. So it was hardly a Tull guy. It was really just Martin was the only other Tull member. So they worked on these songs. They recorded these songs. And musically, they're different from what Tull was doing. In retrospect, they flow like a Tull album. I get it. But at the time, they were very drastically different from what they were doing with the albums previous. But the record company insisted that he make it a Tull album.
Yeah.
That
was one thing. Yeah. And that was kind of the one thing that I didn't know for a long time was that I don't remember where I saw it. I don't remember if he talked about an interview I saw him do or if I read it somewhere, but I was kind of surprised that it was actually the record label that stepped in and said, no, you need to release this as a Jethro Tull album.
Yeah. They said they would not release an Ian Anderson album.
Yeah. They
wanted that to be a Tull album.
In retrospect, it should have been released as a Ian Anderson album.
I agree.
And this is kind of where I was going with the whole Heavy Horses issue. Whereas with Heavy Horses, they made an effort to kind of steer clear of what the musical trend was. And then and Broadsword and the Beast, they went like head over heels into the shit electronic era.
I think you need to listen to A again.
Or synthesizer era.
I think you need to listen to A again. A is not as synthesized as you think it is.
There's definitely a lot more synthesizer in it.
There's a lot of synthesizer in Stormwatch too.
No, there's definitely more of it in A.
I would say it's not that much more, and that's someone who's listened to A lot, even more recently.
Oh no, I've listened to it. I've listened to it quite a few times.
Yes, there's more of it because that's Eddie Jobson. That's what he played. He wasn't a piano player. He was a keyboard player.
Yeah, I know.
So yeah, I can maybe see a little bit, but overall, there's some hard-hitting rock out songs on that album. I would say one of the better 80s songs of all time. There's two on that album that I think stand out. As if I had to rank songs now, just individual songs would be in my top 10, maybe top 20, because we're talking about 300 songs plus. Black Sunday and Uniform. And arguably, Protect and Survive is one of the most progressive rock songs Ian Anderson has done since Thick as a Brick. Just musically speaking. So I have a hard time when people, I'm not going to say your opinion's wrong because you can like what you like, but I'm going to be a defender of a lot of this.
And just because, and like I said, if this was an Ian Anderson album, I would have less of an issue with it.
Right.
But when you make it, when you make an album, and you say, look, I understand that I see music going in a certain direction, and we're staying clear of that. We don't want that to be us. And I understand that you kind of have to, your music has to evolve at a certain level. But I feel like, and maybe not so much with A, but definitely with their next album, Broadsword and the Beast. I mean, it's like the heavy synthesizer use just is where you're like I said, you're saying one thing and they're doing something completely different.
Well, with A, it is a solo album as far as I'm concerned. But then again, you could argue that that Minstrel in the Gallery was a solo album because It started out almost as a solo album. I said that earlier. It starts out with very independent. Not like
a lot of bands are like that. I would actually say probably most bands are like that, where there's a one key person that writes a majority of the music and lyrics.
Well,
look at the Foo Fighters' first album. Dave Grohl recorded the entire fucking album himself.
Okay,
it's still a Foo Fighters album, but
right. But would you argue that if come say the next album, but if the band's more involved, do you discredit that? Do you discredit the idea that it's different because it's going to be different? You say, well, it doesn't sound like a Foo Fighters album now because the other band members added their
No, because I would say that from This Was to Stand Up was different because you had a different musical force, but from Stand Up through jtull.com, it was the same musical force.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, yeah, and that's what I was going to argue because I was going to bring in some of Ian Anderson's solo albums as a point, but I wasn't sure where you.
And that's why I said, like A, like if musically speaking, if you look at A, it's much more reminiscent of a lot of his solo work to me.
Well,
and that's why I said if it was a Ian Anderson album, I would have a much less of an issue with it than because obviously and that's where a lot of musicians do that when they strike out. Look at Freddie Mercury's solo albums. They're very different than what he was doing with Queen because that's kind of what you do with a solo album. If you wanted to do the same shit you're doing with your band, you make another band album,
right.
And that's why I said if it wasn't A, and it's in the A obviously is for Anderson because that's right. It was a solo album.
Right.
If it was Ian Anderson's solo album, like I said, I would have much less issues with it than I do because it's a Jethro Tull album.
Well, next time you listen to it, close your eyes and pretend it's an Ian Anderson solo album.
Because it's not.
Because ultimately, everything about it is an Ian Anderson solo album until he hands over the recording to the record company and says, "Here's my solo album." They say, "No, make it a Tull album."
Oh, it's only a Jethro Tull album.
It's a Jethro Tull album in title only.
It's still Jethro Tull album. It's released under the Jethro Tull name.
I don't understand how the name on the album has any effect on what you think of the music. That makes no sense to me.
Why is that? Because here's the thing. Because if I was a musician, if I was Ian Anderson, and I recorded this album, and I went to turn in the music label, and the label goes, "Oh no, you need to release this under Jethro Tull." My response would be, "But this isn't a Jethro Tull album. If you want me to make a Jethro Tull album, I'll get the band in here. We'll make a Jethro Tull album. This is not a Jethro Tull album, though."
Right.
And you can't tell me that Ian Anderson in 1980 didn't have the cachet with the record label at that time to say to
if
make that happen.
they said they weren't going to release an Ian Anderson solo album, and you just did all this work. I mean, what's the point then? They're not going to release this as an Ian Anderson album. So yeah, I get what you're saying. Okay, we'll get together and do another album, but
and that's kind of where that's kind of where I call bullshit on it. Is like I said with the record label.
Mm-hmm.
How do they? I don't know. I just don't see how they actually stop him from releasing a solo album.
If they had released 3 or 4 number ones prior to this, you're right. He has plenty of pull, and he can do whatever he wants. But they weren't releasing number ones. They were still releasing albums that were charting lower than the albums before.
Overall, prior to Stormwatch, the 3 albums prior to that were actually all 5 of the albums prior to that, 6 albums that all charted in the top 20 in both the UK and the US before
they're not number one
prior to Stormwatch.
They're not number one.
but they're all top 20 albums is what I'm saying.
Right.
That's a feat that is hard to do. I mean, obviously I know there's lots of bands that have done that, but that's not something that's easily done. And that's why I'm saying after at this point a 10 plus year relationship, I don't see how Ian Anderson goes in there and sits down and they say, okay, well, you can't, we're not going to release this album we're not going to release this as an Ian Anderson album because there had to have been some kind of conversation prior to that. That Ian Anderson was like, okay, well, I'm going to record something as myself and not the band.
Right. Well, I don't know.
And if there wasn't,
I can tell you,
if there wasn't some kind of conversation, I think that speaks to the arrogance of Ian Anderson.
Well, I can tell you this. In retrospect, he has said on numerous occasions in the last 10 years that he should have fought harder for that to not be a Jethro Tull album.
And that's why I'm saying if that situation went down like that, I'm sure it probably went down more so as a suggestion, and he kind of just said okay.
No, it was more than a suggestion, but I don't know. All I'm saying is
neither one of us were there, so
right. And based on what he says, he does regret that decision overall. I don't see how what name on the album has anything to do with how good the album is.
Because it's more goes along the lines of hypocrisy, but it's whatever. We'll move on because I've got bigger issues with the next couple of albums also.
Yeah. Well, okay. Nothing came out in 81. First year there was a gap without a release.
Yeah. Was there a reason for that? They just take a break or?
I don't know. I really don't. I think it was just a break. Ian Anderson wrote like 30 songs in that period of time.
Yeah.
And 10 of which made it onto Broadsword and the Beast. But when they did go into making Broadsword and the Beast, it was the first time Ian Anderson said, okay, now I really want to get a producer in on this. I don't want to produce this myself. It was a bad choice, by the way.
It was their highest charting album of the 80s, though. We'll say that.
Yeah. Did it chart really high, though? When what the chart numbers were?
19 in the U.S., 27 in the U.K. So it's not bad.
Okay.
It's still a top 20 album in the U.S. And it went silver in the U.K.
Okay. But I think it was a mistake. Not to say that the producer they got was bad. It was Paul Samwell Smith. He had produced the vast majority of Cat Stevens albums, and it kind of worked out because they had just hired Gary Conway to play drums, which Gary Conway or Jerry Conway. I'm not sure if it's Jerry or Gary, but it's probably Jerry. He played drums on most of Cat Stevens albums as well.
Yeah.
I don't think he was a drummer for Tull, and I think that plays a big part in. There's not a lot of synthesized drums in Broadsword and the Beast.
No,
but there is some. There's some synthesized drums, just specifically on one song. But overall, the album is very toned down. It's very bare bones.
Mm-hmm.
And critics, I remember there being critics who said that Broadsword and the Beast is the album that brought Tull into the 80s.
Mm-hmm. I can agree with that.
I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
I think it's an all right album.
Because
it's probably very low on my list, though.
I would say this, that Broadsword, they definitely took some more of that 70s folk sound, and they blended it with that 80s synthesizer sound.
Okay.
And that's kind of where I can see the progression of where they kind of brought the music into the 80s.
Yeah.
Because it's definitely more of an 80s style album than A was.
Yeah, no argument there. I just feel that even though there's some really good songs on there and some good themes going on there, overall I find it kind of hollow, kind of empty. And because, as I said, he wrote like a bunch of songs in between the end of 80 and when this album was released, and only 10 of them show up on this album.
Yeah.
Of all those other songs, they've been released retroactively over the years. Or not retro, you know what I mean, over the year as unreleased material. When those songs were produced and recorded the same way all other Tull stuff was, much better songs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even songs with the same band members playing instruments. I kind of shit on Jerry Conway a little bit, but even songs with him on it are way better. So the only thing I can figure is Paul Samuel Smith is a good producer. Jerry Conway is a good drummer, but neither one of them work well with Tull.
Yeah. No, I get it.
You know,
I completely agree.
And at this point, really, the only original Tull there is Dave Pegg, Ian Anderson, and Martin Barr. So everything else around that is just going to be interchangeable anyway.
Yeah.
Which it is for the duration of up until 95 when they lose Dave Pegg.
Yeah.
You know?
The kind of the cool thing is about this album was first off the album cover. And the album cover was created by a Jethro Tull fan by the name of Lane McCaig. Mm-hmm. And he said that he actually, he didn't go into great detail, at least in the article I was reading about it, is that he put Jethro Tull Easter eggs in the cover of the album.
Other than the faces in the border?
There are hidden images in the cover of this album, which I think that's cool.
I have to look deeper because I've seen, obviously there's the band members' faces minus Dave Pegg, ironically. I think it's Jerry Conway's missing. It's Peter, John Vitesse, Dave Pegg, Martin Barr, and Ian Anderson in the corners.
Well, I read, so when we originally did our Jethro Tull episode, I kind of is when I was reading about it, so I kind of have to dig back in my memory because of course I didn't write any of this stuff down, but I think it was more so like the images were references to lyrics
for the album or other albums
of Jethro Tull albums is what it said.
I'll have to look at it and I'll dig deeper. It's an album cover I love. I think it's one of the like say top 10 album covers of all time if you ask me, but I mean I'm obviously biased, but I'd say
it's a good album cover. I don't know about top 10, but it's definitely a good album cover.
Yeah. It's definitely probably one of the best album covers for Jethro Tull.
Yeah, so, I would agree.
And that's maybe second to the one behind me here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there anything else you wanted to say about that album?
There's some good songs on it, but overall, I don't really like it.
Yeah.
I prefer the next two albums, honestly, over this one. And
I would say this about Broadsword and the Beast. I mean, out of their entire catalog, it's probably the album I've listened to the least, of everything they've released. That and Under Wraps, because I was never look, man, I'm gonna say it right now. I hate electronic drums, and the drums in Under Wraps kill me.
Okay, well. It's all electronic, so I get it.
Yeah, it's the only album out of their entire catalog where there's not a live drummer.
Yes, but all the drums are played live when the album was performed. But with electronic drums.
Yeah, I mean,
they're played live with electronic drums. He's playing the electronic drums.
I know.
When he's playing those songs, he's playing real drums when he's playing.
The cool thing is, so I mean, the concept behind the album is kind of cool. It's heavily influenced by Ian Anderson's love of espionage fiction, which is kind of cool. So it's
specifically John le Carre.
Yeah.
We did skip real quick. I do want to touch base because '83 did bring forth the very first Ian Anderson solo album, and a lot of what's going on there influenced what Under Wraps became.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it was Ian Anderson finally built a studio on his own property.
Yeah.
His own in-home.
Which is really surprising because that's by the early '80s. I mean, it was especially for a band that had been around as long as they have been.
They'd always recorded on the road, Nick. Everything was recorded on the road.
Yeah, but I mean, most musicians had some kind of studio at their house to record.
He just didn't. He didn't put it in until late '82.
Strange.
But as a result, when he's buying all the new equipment, a lot of new technologies, new types of musical instruments, electronic instruments, a lot of things came with that property. And it was just him playing around with it. Peter John Vitesse he was a young kid. He was only like 20-something years old at the time. So he was more familiar with that. So Ian Anderson brought him in to kind of teach him how to work a lot of this stuff. And as a result, they worked on music together that is very electronic. I think there's maybe there's very little flute in the album. And there's a couple times when Ian Anderson's playing electric guitar. The rest of the album is all synthesized. Yeah. But it was just a matter of working and learning how to write music and record with all this new equipment. So really, it was all just an experiment. And as a result, I think, for better or worse, Ian Anderson learned things in that he felt could be applied to Jethro Tull.
Yeah.
And when they went to record Under Wraps, he brought a lot of that with him. At the time, they did not have a drummer. Jerry Conway went off and did other things. So it was just a natural progression. We did an album with no drummer by myself. We'll work on this material and see what happens. Personally, I think the complexity of the music, even though it is a lot of electronic music, is the peak of the '80s. I don't think anything they did before or after was as complex as what's going on in Under Wraps. Though it is an electronic album, the guitar is there.
Very much.
The guitar is there. The bass is there, but the keyboards and the drums are all electronic, and it's all it is very electronic album. And in retrospect, Ian Anderson says he would love, if he could, because he can't do it vocally, if he could, he would go back and re-record that entire album with real instruments. That was one regret.
I think it would be a better album.
Yeah, he said that on numerous occasions. He likes the music, what he wrote, but he would love to go back and re-record that.
Yeah. The interesting thing real quick about this album is that this is the first album since this was that a majority of the songs were co-written by somebody else.
Yes, Peter John Vitesse, and I think Martin Barr actually wrote all the music, not the lyrics, just the music for the song Paparazzi.
Yeah.
So yeah, Ian Anderson, this was a band effort too. I mean, the band was there. Everyone was very proud of it. Now this is one of the things where the record company, you think Ian Anderson had a lot of pull. Chrysalis Records was co-owned and co-founded by Terry Ellis, who was Tull's manager.
Yeah.
When they finished the album, they had him come down and listen to it. He came in, sat down, they played the entire album for him. All the time he's drinking from a bottle of wine. He finished the wine while the duration of the album. He stood up and said, "We need another fucking Aqualung, not this bullshit," and walked out.
That's funny.
So, I mean, they didn't. Yeah, Ian Anderson had a pull, but didn't mean that the record label didn't treat him like shit.
Oh well,
he was still an employee of the band of the record label.
I will say one other thing that I was reading an article where Dave Pegg was quoted as saying that he thinks had they incorporated more of the tracks that were cut from the album, that it would have been a much better album.
There were only 4 tracks cut, and they did incorporate them onto the CD. There's no unreleased material from that album that I know of. Because I would have said the same thing about some.
Well, that's a direct quote from Dave Pegg.
Okay. Well, that's all the more reason why I would really love to hear Steve Wilson's remix because they don't release all the new shit unless he goes through all the archives to clean it all up.
Yeah.
I mean, that as a result of Steve Wilson's remix, we got 2 unreleased recordings from 1974 that I never knew existed.
Yeah.
2 unreleased recordings from 1976 I didn't know existed. 1 from 77, 4 from 78, 4 from 79. And these are all songs that Ian Anderson didn't even know existed.
And I guess looking at it this way, it might not even have been anything that they really released. It could have been something that they were just working on.
Right. I know that there's an instrumental version of one of the tracks off of Ian Anderson's solo album that is not as electronic. Like he's playing real guitar, real flute, and it's an instrumental version. So I do know that's out there. I don't know how complete it is.
Yeah.
But I'm all about the shit I haven't heard. So it's very exciting to hear that. I did not know that. I've never seen that quote before.
Mm-hmm.
But unless Steve Wilson does it or they get somebody else to do it, and Ian Anderson's cool,
you'll never see it. Probably.
You'll never hear it. Exactly. Because Ian Anderson doesn't care.
No,
he does. He loves what Steve Wilson's done with it, and he's always said if Steve Wilson wants to do the whole catalog, he can do whatever he wants. He doesn't question it. He just comes and puts his signature on it and says, do what you want.
Yeah.
He's been pretty much hands off since Passion Play with that stuff because Passion Play, he wanted Steve Wilson to fuck with it. He wanted to change everything. He wanted to, take that saxophone out of there, do whatever change it however you want. And Steve Wilson said no. And as a result, Ian Anderson just said, okay, well, you obviously know what you're doing because it does sound better. So, but ultimately, Under Wraps is an album. I understand why people don't like it.
Yeah.
It's very different, but I don't think it's a play at trying to be an 80s band because it is very different from a lot of the shit going on in the 80s too. It is just a band.
I wouldn't say a whole lot different. I mean, I understand that they're trying to find.
They're using the same. They're using the techniques that were the same, but musically speaking, that album was not going to appeal to the old Tull card, and it definitely wasn't going to appeal to the kids listening to Duran Duran.
I think it's funny though, because if you look at that album and then you look at their next album, Crest of a Knave, Crest of a Knave was definitely more of a hard rock album than and more of a kind of a traditional rock album than anything else that they had done before that in the 80s.
Yeah. And I should point out that this is after Under Wraps was the longest period of time they went without recording anything. And after 84, it was the longest period they'd gone without touring before and since.
Yeah. I want to say that
they took a whole year off because of Ian Anderson's voice.
Yeah. Well, he had a throat infection.
And he strained his voice really bad trying to sing the Under Wraps songs.
Yeah. And that's why there is kind of definitely a different vocal style that he uses on Crest of a Knave than what he used prior to that.
Yeah, the doctors told him he had to tone it down, and they were the ones who told him he had to take a year off. He did do one performance in 1986. They did I think it was a tribute to Bach. I think it was Bach. It was 300th birthday. So it was I think it was Bach's 300th birthday. They did a concert. That was it. One concert in 1986. They didn't do anything in 85, and from that one concert in 86 to their tour in 87 that started in September, I think, of 87.
Yeah.
No touring at all. But again, it gave Ian Anderson time to sit down and just kind of write songs his own way.
But it worked. It worked because in 1989 they won the Best Hard Rock Grammy.
Yeah, for an album that is not a hard rock album.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, as far as Jethro Tull catalog goes, it's probably more of a hard rock album than a lot of their other music.
See, I don't know. I think there's harder hitting songs on Stormwatch. There's harder hitting songs. Minstrel McGallery.
I'm talking total album, like overall album. I feel it's got a more of a hard rock. I'm not saying obviously comparing it to Metallica and Justice for All, which should have won the Grammy that year. Yeah. It's not like that kind of hard rock,
right? Well, and I think for what it's worth, Ian Anderson has been quoted as saying, we didn't win because we had the best hard rock album. We won because we're a bunch of nice guys that the very aging Academy, or a band that the Academy had actually heard of before.
Yeah.
So, because I don't know how that works, but I know that it was a new category. It was the first year for it.
It was.
Metallica was not a mainstream band, but it was quickly becoming a mainstream band. But that kind of music, their kind of music, wasn't mainstream yet. Or,
You know what the interesting thing is like according, I guess I'd have to go back and look because I have it written down as because they won the Grammy for best hard rock / metal performance instrumental.
I thought it was the album because it's listed as Crest of a Knave 1.
Yeah.
So,
but I have to go back and look because I just have it written in my notes that way.
AC/DC and Iggy Pop were the other two artists in that category nominated, and I don't see them doing instrumental songs. Metallica has instrumental songs. They've done several up to that point, but I don't think AC/DC or Iggy Pop ever did instrumental songs. They're not really instrumental type.
I don't know because I guess I've never listened to what Iggy Pop album would that have been.
God, I don't know. I don't know any of Iggy Pop's stuff. I mean, even his Stooges stuff. I'd recognize it if I heard it, but I wouldn't know any of it by name or anything.
And AC/DC would have been the Black album?
No, this is 89, so this would have been
89, that would have been Razor's Edge.
Yeah.
Which that wasn't all that great of an album anyway, but I don't remember
There's some good songs on it. I think Money Talks is one of the best songs.
It is. So it's Thunderstruck, but still.
Like
overall, there's probably only like 3 songs on that album that I would say are like really good songs. So
well, ultimately, you can't get in a category like that without selling. I mean, Crest of a Knave sold very well. They sold about 1 million records.
It went gold in the U.S.
Yeah,
it reached number 32 on the charts.
Right. So, I mean, if they sold 100,000 copies only, they wouldn't have been in that category. So,
and it was their first gold album since Stormwatch and their last.
Yeah. Well, I honestly think them winning the Grammy hurt them. I really do.
I don't know. I'm sure there was
they became a joke to people after that.
There was a backlash for a short period of time. We can get to the next album. Rock Island is I think a better album than Crest of a Knave.
I agree. Wow, we actually agree on something.
Yeah, and it's not. I mean, I'm still not a huge fan of the album, but it's probably one of their better albums of the '80s for sure.
Well, I'm still a hardliner for Under Wraps, but yeah, no, I would put I'd put Rock Island as my third favorite of the '80s.
Yeah, well, Rock Island was kind of a continuation of that rock sound.
Yes, it was a heavier album. It was, I think, intentionally a heavier album than Crest of a Knave was.
Yeah.
Crest of a Knave had a lot of soft ballady songs on it.
Yeah.
That's why I don't understand why it won for best hard rock, whereas Rock Island was pretty much a straightforward hard rock album.
I think Rock Island was more of a response to them winning that Grammy.
Possibly.
Because they were like, look, you thought Crest of a Knave was a rock album? I'll give you a rock album.
Right, exactly. And no one bought it.
No. Well, it went silver in the UK. And right. I mean, it actually charted pretty decent in the UK. It was charted 18, which is one spot higher than Crest of a Knave, but it charted 56 here in the US.
Yeah. So, or no one in the U.S. bought it. How's that?
Yeah.
Except for my dad. And he bought it on CD. I think it was the second Tull album that came out, and he bought it on CD for the first run.
Yeah.
I take that back because he had Crest of a Knave on vinyl, but he did not buy Rock Island on vinyl. So.
And then that kind of. What was that?
I was going to say with Rock Island, I think it's some of Dave Pegg's best playing, bass-wise.
That's not really saying a whole lot.
Well, you also have to take into account he's a folk bassist.
Yeah.
His bass playing is from he grew up as a folk bassist.
Yeah.
What kind of bass? I mean, how you're not going to be doing any flea type shit in a folk bass.
I know that. Yeah, I know.
But.
Overall, he's probably a better bass player than what Jeffrey Hammond was, but I think he's still a very rudimentary bass player.
Yeah, perhaps. I would say that Glenn Cornick was their best.
Yeah.
And John Glasscock was their second best.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Because John Glasscock was a great bass player.
He was really good.
But
and then that kind of brings us into the 90s. It kind of gets us out of that shit 80s sound.
80s funk, yeah.
And their next two albums, I think, were kind of like I said earlier, returns. They finally found that sound that they had, and they did such a great job with in the 70s. Because Catfish Rising and Rooster Branches, I think, are head and shoulders above anything that they had released since Stormwatch.
Yeah, no, I guess I can't necessarily argue with that. I definitely wouldn't put either one of those albums below Under Wraps. As you know, I'd put them above Under Wraps. Is what I'm saying. Yeah. As much as I love Under Wraps, and Rooster Branches is probably the best album of their latter period.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But I do love Catfish Rising. There's so much good stuff going on in Catfish Rising because it is such a toned down, almost bluesy folk album.
Absolutely.
And it's just just one of my top. That's in my top 10 by far. So
it's funny you mentioned that too, because that's one thing I had in my notes that was much more of a blues sound than anything that they had done the previous 15 plus years.
Right.
Really, probably since this was.
Right. And I think that was just kind of a natural. It wasn't that he was going for a blues sound. I think it just kind of naturally came out of the fact that they were bringing it back to like a wooden instrument type of thing.
Yeah.
Mandolins, heavy mandolin in that album.
Yep.
More acoustic guitar, straightforward electric guitar. I mean, just everything was just toned down to bare bones instruments.
And guess what?
Makes a huge difference.
And guess what?
What?
It didn't sell.
No, nobody bought it.
Nobody bought it. And it's unfortunate because it is a good album. But then that's funny. Then you kind of come to Roots to Branches, which I think, like, if Catfish Rising is 1A of the post 70s music, I think Roots to Branches is 1B. I mean, it just it's either or. It's either one of them are definitely my.
Right. Roots to Branches is way more heavy though. It's got more rock to it than
it is. Blues. It is. But I think definitely Roots to Branches, I think definitely is their most complete albums since the 70s. Because beginning to end.
Yeah, I could see that. Like I said, it's to give context. My first favorite is Thick as a Brick. Second, Minstrel the Gallery. Third, Stormwatch. Fourth, Roots to Branches. Fifth, Songs from the Wood. So my top 5, Roots to Branches is the only non-70s one in that top 5.
Yeah.
Because I think Roots to Branches is just a wonderful album.
The interesting thing with Roots to Branches is I think Jethro Tull did a perfect job at what they, in my opinion, messed up going into the 80s. And that was, they found an evolution that kind of worked.
Right.
Because that album was definitely had jazz influence. It had Indian influence. It had some Arabic influences. It definitely had an Eastern sound to some of it. So you had this influence. But I think the thing that really hurt Roots to Branches was that it was released in 1995. So you've got this like huge grunge explosion going on. And I think that's the main reason why it really undercharted. Because I mean, in the US it charted at 114.
Yeah.
Where in the UK it was a top 20 album.
Really?
Which is a huge disparity.
Yeah, well, of course. Do you really think it matters though that the grunge was the heavy force? Because
if this album had been released in say 1989, I think it would have sold better. Because it's a great album, but it was just kind of covered over by what was going on in the music.
But I don't think any audience was ready for it in '89.
No.
Because it would have been way too ahead of its time.
Yeah,
it almost was as it is.
But like I said, it's a great album, but it was just bad timing. It was just everything else that was going on in the music scene just kind of covered over it.
Yeah, arguably though, it could have been great timing because if you look at the lyrics specifically for the song Roots to Branches, and then to a much lesser extent Dangerous Veils, there's a lot of Islamic it's not criticizing Islam, but it is referencing the fundamental extremism of
Yeah.
Islam,
Mhm.
which 6 short years later we get 2001.
Yeah.
There are elements of that song that are almost uncanny predictive
Mhm.
of what was coming, and then just weirdly.
Well, because that kind of stuff prior to, because obviously September 11th kind of brought all that to the common forefront in the United States, but that stuff had been growing for a
Right.
decade. I mean, really since the early 80s in Europe.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, I
it
mean, and
was,
that's what
it was definitely something that people outside the United States had more of an idea what was going on than people living their lives here.
right. But you just ultimately, from a perspective of as an American, and hearing that song specifically, and then after that happened, and then thinking, and when we think about it, you're just thinking, oh my God, this was 6 years ago, and it is, like I said, it is uncannily predictive of,
Yeah.
obviously on a much more poetic level, but
Yeah.
yeah. So, and I guess ultimately, and we should point out that the break between Catfish Rising and Roots to Branches is now again the largest gap in between a new album being released. It's 4 years. Um, Up to this point, there has only been a gap of 2 years in between albums, or 3 years from Under Wraps to Crest of May, but 2 years other than that.
Yeah.
And a sign of things to come.
Well, I mean, the next album was, it was the last Jethro Tull album.
It was the last, yes. Some people argue that the Christmas album in 2003 was the last, but it's not.
No, it's jtull.com was released in 99. It was their last album to feature full original music.
Yes.
If you want to put it that way.
With Martin Barre, because Martin Barre and Ian Anderson, Martin Barre is the only one who stuck with the band through the entirety of the 70s and through the entirety of the 80s.
Yeah.
And ultimately, he stayed until 2012.
Yeah.
But Ian had always said, if Martin Barre is with me, it's a Jethro Tull album. And if he's not, it's not. And it was the last one that Martin Barre played on other than the Christmas album.
Yeah. But
that being said, it was probably a terrible album to go out on. I really wish they would have done one more album.
I will say this, that I don't have much of an opinion of the album because I'm pretty sure I'm going to listen to it once, and that was shortly after it came out. I think I listened to it in your car after you bought the CD, and I felt, obviously comparing it to the album before,
right,
that it wasn't. I mean, it's an okay album. Nothing really stood out to me though.
No, and that's really its problem. It's a bunch of all right songs. They're good songs. Every one of them is a good song, except for Hot Mango Flesh. Hot Mango Flesh sucks. And Mango Surprise, which is just kind of a reprise of Hot Mango Flesh. Terrible. It's garbage. And I hate to say it, it was musically written by Martin Barre. That doesn't say much because he wrote musically. He did Paparazzi. He wrote the music for Paparazzi and Under Wraps. I love that song.
Yeah.
But he wrote the music for Hot Mango Flesh. Ian Anderson wrote the lyrics. I hate it. I can't stand it. It's this weird, I don't even know what to call it. It's not good. I hate it. I never listened to it. If I had my way, it would not even be on the album.
Yeah.
But overall, the rest of the songs, they're good. They're good songs. They're all right songs. There's nothing bad going on. But you're just, For Jethro Tull, they're
Yeah, I get it.
So, I don't know. To me, there's one or two songs on there where it's Ian Anderson being more pop than he ever been for the time period anyway. Gift of Roses, I think, sounds too much like a pop song for a 1990s pop song. Not like a dance pop song, but just like a pop rock song, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not overly impressed with the album. Never have been. If we're allowed to go further, because this is the last Jethro Tull album, Secret Language of Birds is probably the Roots to Branches of the 2000s.
Really?
By far. It's basically just an acoustic album. It's just an Ian Anderson solo album. The only person who plays on it from the band is Andrew Giddings on keyboards, and he does very little. And we did skip over Ian Anderson's other solo album, Divinities, which is an all-instrumental, they call it a classic rock, or not a classical something or other, but it actually charted number 1 on the classical crossover charts. Crossover, that's what it is.
No, I do remember that.
It actually charted number 1. But it's a great album, but it's just instrumental kind of orchestral music. But Secret Language of Birds is a great fucking album. Because I count all Ian Anderson solo albums as Tull albums because he wrote them all anyway. I put it at number 6 in my top 10 or my top list.
Okay.
So if anyone out there, give Secret Language of Birds a try because it's a great album. It's one of those albums that it's unique, it's toned down, it's kind of bare bones again. Ian Anderson with an acoustic guitar, flute, not a lot of heavy riffs are going on. Just there's a lot of the ethnic influences that you find on Roots to Branches, but just very toned back, and it's very acoustic. It's very good.
What once again, what'd you say your top 5 was? Ever since you mentioned that, I've been kind of thinking of over my head trying to figure out what mine would be.
Number 1 is Thick as a Brick. Number 2 is Minstrel in the Gallery. Number 3 is Stormwatch. Number 4 is Roots to Branches, and number 5 was Songs from the Wood.
I would have to go probably Benefit 1.
Okay.
Minstrel probably 2. Stand Up 3. Probably 4 would be Roots to Branches.
Okay.
And then 5 would probably be Songs from Wood.
So our 4 and 5 are the same.
Yeah.
So
I think our number 2 was too, I think.
Minstrel in the Gallery.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good music going on there. And
they do.
We may disagree on their mid-career, we'll say.
Yeah.
A bit. And I would say you should probably, it's amazing how your perspective on things can change as you get older. I know it just depends on how long ago it's been since you listened to these albums, but sometimes listening to it with an older ear, you may hate it more.
Hey, you know what? That's one thing I can say is we've talked about on our Pink Floyd episode. Growing up, I was a Pink Floyd fan. I was a Dark Side of the Moon and the Wall kind of fan. Mm-hmm. And as I've gotten older and kind of gone back and listened to their other albums, I mean, like
you've become a super fan.
Metal is an incredible album, and it was one of those albums that I never really listened to when I was younger. So yeah, obviously as you get older, I think you feel you pick up on things differently.
Yeah.
So you get a different feel, and as you venture through life, I feel like you have a tendency to maybe connect more to that music because of events in your life and things you've lived through. So yeah, I think it's always better. Don't automatically like shit on something. Go back and actually listen to it.
Right. And that's how I feel. Because like I said, there's my perspective on Tull hasn't changed too much, but on specific songs it has considerably. There's songs that I listen to now that I either loved when I was a kid and don't like as much now. And then there's other songs where I didn't like them as much before. And I'm like, why the fuck did I hate that song or not like that song as much?
Yeah.
That song's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's even other bands. It's other artists and that I completely disregarded when I was younger. I'm thinking, why the hell did I do that?
Yeah.
But, I never really when I was like a teenager, I didn't like Radiohead. Now I love Radiohead.
Yeah.
Why? Because perspective changes.
Yeah. But I would definitely say if you're like a fan of classic rock, if you're a fan of those 70s bands, Led Zeppelin, all that stuff, go back and listen to the Jethro Tull catalog again and kind of give it a second listen. Even if it's been, 15, 20, 30 years since you've listened to any of it, go back and listen to it again. Or if you're a 20 something, go back and listen to it for the first time.
Right. And do me a favor, don't automatically just go to Aqualung, because I know it's kind of the one that people go to. It's the go-to.
I think it's more accessible to people.
It might be, but I think start maybe like it's stand up, maybe a more benefit, but then skip over Aqualung, go to Thick as a Brick, go to Minstrel in the Gallery, go to Songs from the Wood, because I think that's a bit more indicative of what the band was at that time.
Oh yeah, 70s. Absolutely.
So a little trivia, and I did not know this because when I told you I listened to a bunch of records the other day, a bunch of Tull records the other day. The remastered vinyls come with booklets that are 40th anniversary edition booklets.
Did you say vinyls?
Vinyl records.
You said vinyls.
Vinyls, plural. Multiple vinyl records, plural.
The multiple of vinyl is vinyl. Just want to say
whatever. Multiple of record is record. So vinyl records.
Yes,
I must be corrected.
You can say you went back and listened to some records, but you went back and listened.
I was
vinyl.
implying that I was listening to the vinyl version.
I just pointed that out because like that's one of the big jokes in the vinyl community. But
okay.
Go ahead with what you're saying.
All right, whatever. But anyway, I was reading through the Passion Play book, and we were talking about the Chateau de Horville, where they recorded the Lost album. Pink Floyd recorded there too. They recorded Obscured by Clouds.
Absolutely.
I didn't know that.
I did know that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
I did.
Interesting little side note.
Obscured by Clouds is not that great of an album, though.
No. Well, apparently it's not that great of a studio, apparently. Although Cat Stevens' Catch Bullet 4 is a great album. So,
yeah.
It's probably the last great album he made, ultimately. So.
But that's about it, man. That's all I had.
Yeah. Check out Jethro Tull, please.
Yeah. Go out there and listen to him. Like, it's not something I have in like heavy rotation, but I definitely go back. My wife, Mandy, hates it, by the way. Every time I listen to a Jethro Tull song and she's around, she gives me a bunch of shit about it, but whatever. I think it's more so with the flute than anything else, but
I don't understand that.
I don't know. It's some people don't like certain.
Can't argue with it either.
Certain instruments, I guess, but you freezing up on me, man? I guess so. I guess I'll go ahead and end the show for you.
Did you just
all right?
it?
Well, you're on. It's on pause now, so yeah. Okay. I'm just wrapping the show. I was gonna wrap up the show without you, Ian, but
we froze. No, I don't. I usually have my internet set to stay connected all the time. Well, I was playing around with stuff earlier, and I shut that off, and I forgot to turn it back on. And
so it's all Ian's fault.
My internet timed out and it disconnected from the wireless. So this time it wasn't.
We've been talking too long. That's what it is, man.
Yeah, well, that's
I just wanted to say, any questions or comments, you can email us at contact@lifeanddrawpodcast.com. Check us out on Twitter @LIGpod. Follow the show on Facebook. I need to post more stuff on there, but obviously follow us on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, thanks for checking us out.
If you're watching this on YouTube, all these things he's mentioning are all listed at the very end of the titles.
Yeah,
watch it. I put work into it.
Check out Ian's editing.
I put some work into it. So there's cheaply made animated titles, but they're there and they tell you all the information you need. So.
Leave us a 5-star review on iTunes and check out the show on Spotify and iHeartRadio or just about everywhere else too. But that's all I got, man.
I'm good.
Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Peace.
Play my role, let me tell you about it. This shit right here, man, I'm about it. Only real niggas reside around me. Yo, lady, drop a guard around me. Dip like I know you can, bitch. Show me the ropes like we in the ring. Got you two cobras, you wanna hang. Shoulder to shoulder, them niggas basic. You know I won't lie. You know that I ain't for that fuck shit. You niggas alright, but I'm way better and she love it. Know that y'all sick as fuck. Here go this tissue, bro. We taking the dub. Hoping you get you some. This hit like a pick me up. She taking my drugs. Know they see the sign. That's some dollar signs. Know they sick as fuck. Know they sick as fuck. Tell them get well soon. Tell them get well soon. Know you sick as fuck. Get well soon.
Oh shit. Watch out, you the god, Billy. Oh shit. Right now, and I'm smiling in your face, bitch. With a gold smile, you should probably make placement to your eye. Niggas sick as fuck. Standing with niggas. Who down for that party? Who down for some bitches who showing their bodies? Swear to God, nigga, this Molly got me up and rolling. These bodies of water. Bring that shit in bottles. We mosh at the party, that hit when we stylin'.